I'm excited to share what I've recently learned about making remote content accessible to everyone. For teachers and educational practitioners, determining what is appropriate content and how accessible the learning management systems are newly required tasks. Most people today can hardly conceive of life without the internet. Some have argued that no other single invention has been more revolutionary since Gutenberg's printing press in the 1400s. The internet made blind people less dependent on others to read to them when screen reading technology debuted. Suddenly, they didn't have to rely on other people to read the newspaper to them, for example. They didn't have to wait for expensive audio tapes or bulky Braille printouts. They can simply open a web browser and listen as their screen reader tells them what the newspaper says. They can do it independently when they want to, and as soon as the content is published. Take a minute to read this sentence, and then I'll talk about what it says and what it means. Were you able to read that sentence? What if you'd been an elementary school student? Would the pressure have stressed you out? What if your peers were pushing you along by blurting out the words as you tried your best to decode the symbols? This might give you some indication of how people with learning disabilities, such as dyslexia, might feel their whole lives. Estimates vary, though most studies find that about 1/5 of the population has some kind of disability. Not all of these people have disabilities that make it difficult for them to access the internet, but it's still a significant portion of the population. The Centers for Disease Control reports a higher number, 1 in 4. Businesses would be unwise to purposely exclude 20 or 10 or even 5% of their population, their customers, from their websites. For schools, universities, and government entities, it would not only be unwise, but in many cases, it would also violate the law. The major categories of disability types are visual, hearing, motor, and cognitive. Cognitive and learning disabilities are most common, and inclusive design of online content can help a lot of people. Disabilities are on a continuum. They don't always go away. People often improve after having a stroke, and a broken leg will heal, but many people have to learn to live with disabilities and navigate through the school system with disabilities that make, for example, processing information more difficult. This slide shows an example of what it feels like to have mild cognitive processing difficulties. Next, I'm going to talk about measures designed to make life easier for everyone. Universal design refers to the architectural standards that make life easier for us, while addressing physical limitations. Even if you're not familiar with the term universal design, you've likely encountered many examples of it in your everyday life. Sidewalks and ramps are universal architectural designs that benefit everyone, including mothers pushing strollers, people riding skateboards and bikes, and busy professional people weaving through pedestrian traffic. Automatic doors and accessibility features on smartphones are 2 examples of accessible design which benefit everyone. If you've ever tried to watch the news or a game in a noisy restaurant, you probably used the closed captions to follow along. Closed captioning also helps people in gyms, people who are learning English, and spouses who get to sleep at different times. In education, universal design for learning emerged from the architectural concept of universal design. These principles, developed in the 1990s by Ann Meyer and David Rose at Harvard, assert that curriculum from the outset should be designed to accommodate all kinds of learners to permit the greatest degree of access and usability for the widest range of students. Multiple means of representation gives learners various ways of acquiring information and knowledge. For example, textbooks are primarily visual, but providing text, audio, video, and hands-on learning gives all kids a chance to access the material in whichever way is best suited to their learning preferences. Multiple means of expression gives learners alternatives for demonstrating what they know. For example, giving kids more than one way to interact with the material and to show what they've learned. They might get to choose between taking a pencil and paper test, giving an oral presentation, or doing a group project. Multiple means of engagement will help tap into learners' interests, challenge them appropriately, and motivate them. For example, letting kids make choices and giving them assignments that feel relevant to their lives are some examples of how teachers can sustain their interest. The best thing about using universal design is that it reduces stigma for students with disabilities. By giving a variety of options to all students, universal design doesn't single out the few who require them. The Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, is the main law for K-12 public education in the United States. It replaced No Child Left Behind, and the impact of it should have been evident in the 2017-2018 school year, so now we're in the third year of implementation. Under ESSA, states get to decide the education plans for their schools within a framework that is provided by the federal government. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines go beyond public school K-12. This international set of guidelines was developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C, which is the governing body of the web. These guidelines are the basis of most web accessibility law in the world. Version 2.0 of these guidelines, published in December 2008, was based on POUR, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust web content, designed to help people with all of the major disabilities. Thoughtful instructional design that will address the limitations that some people have is not just a legal requirement. It's the right thing to do. The potential to help people with disabilities is still largely unrealized. For example, some websites can only be navigated using a mouse. Only a very small percentage of video or multimedia content has been closed captioned. What if the internet content is only accessible using a mouse? What do people do if they can't use a mouse? What if web developers used graphics instead of text? If screen readers can only read text, how would they read the graphics to people who are blind? As soon as we start asking these types of questions, we begin to see that there are a few potential glitches in the accessibility of the internet to people with disabilities. Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act requires that communication technology developed, purchased, or maintained by federal agencies or with federal dollars be accessible to individuals with disabilities. Research published in the 2020 April School Library Journal, written by freelance journalist Kelly Taylor, said more than 2,000 lawsuits against federal agencies were filed in 2018 for failure to incorporate accessible content. Taylor also quoted USU's WebAIM director Jared Smith, who said that the biggest challenges organizations face in getting their websites and technology Section 508 accessible are more systematic than technical. Oftentimes, a handful of developers make their own content accessible, while the majority don't bother to, since it's not expected of them. Be a leader and implement these, even if your organization does not have a commitment to it or an internal policy. For the web to reach its full potential for people with disabilities, web developers must commit to designing with accessibility in mind. Failure to do so risks turning a revolutionary solution into yet another barrier in the lives of people with disabilities. What am I supposed to do? Personalized design for every type of disability is not possible or practical, but we can look carefully at the work we do and ask, is my material as inclusive and accessible as I can make it? The following slides offer some suggestions found at USU's WebAIM department for creating accessible web content. Use contrast. Poor contrasting background colors make reading, navigating, and interacting a real pain for people with color blindness because they cannot perceive or see the difference between certain colors. Color contrast is important for people with low contrast sensitivity, often old people, and people who use different lighting situations too. Good design features sufficient contrast between foreground and background colors, not just in text and images, but also for links, icons, and buttons. If it's important enough to be seen, it needs to be clear. It's also recommended that we only underline links to websites. Can users complete and submit all forms? Getting an error message is one thing we don't want to have our users run into. Is my content visibly clear? Making apps and websites predictable and understandable makes them accessible to people with cognitive and learning disabilities, especially people with lower computer skills. Using clear fonts, appropriate headings and listings are important and easy to accommodate changes. Are my buttons and links big enough? Threading a needle is not easy. We can make options for tapping and clicking easier to use by placing them away from other icons and by making them big enough to hit. This is especially helpful for people who are moving around, people with reduced dexterity, and in particular people who have to use a stick in their mouth to tap. Is my document structured? Good design results in a better user experience. Headings, lists, and other structural elements provide meaning and structure within all instructional design. They can also facilitate keyboard navigation within the page, which is necessary when users can't use a mouse. Try turning off your mouse and navigating on the web for 1 hour using only your keyboard. I only lasted 1 minute before giving up on that. Using the keyboard is the only option for many people. Many of these categories require some computer coding work, which may make them seem too difficult. Although I'm just getting started, I'm surprised how within reach these accommodations are to implement. Here's one you can do from now on. We're going to provide appropriate alternative text for a photo so that the text-to-screen reader, which converts text to language for people who can't see, will tell the visually impaired user what the photo is on the screen. It only took me about 15 minutes to convert all of the photographs and graphics in this PowerPoint presentation to alt text, which means that a screen reader coming across a picture will say, for example, this is a picture of a computer keyboard instead of image. Most computer programs have an option to add alt text that is easy to use and easy to find. In Word, for example, you just right-click on your image, select Format Picture, then click on the Layout and Properties drop-down tab, and there you put your alt text words, your description, in the description field. Leave the title field blank. When an image does not have content or function, just leave the description field blank. It's better to use decorative images sparingly because screen readers can't deal with those. Text-to-speech readers also need a little help with hyperlinks. This title, Wikipedia Entries for U.S. Presidents, informs the screen reader software that hyperlinks are used in this section. You'll need to right-click on each of those images, for example, and type in under the alt text description menu the names of the presidents. So you would do that 4 times. Thank you very much.